Life's too short to drive boring cars. The reality is, many of these modern day luxury cars, in fact, are not as reliable as they were 30, 40, or 50 years ago. There are some distinct reasons for that. I'm going to share with you 5 reasons why, in fact, they're not as reliable today as they once were. Let's get into it now. Well, very, very disappointing because, in fact, engineers are now smarter. They know the limits of what they can get away with and what they can't. There's improvements on metallurgy, so cars last a lot longer in terms of the body structure and integrity. They're safer. And now with 30, 40, 50, and 60 years under the belt, you'd think that they learned from some of the history and some of the mistakes. But sadly, that's not the case. So the first reason is the fact that luxury car markets have such a tight and aggressive and competitive marketplace, so much stiff competition. For example, to get into a market like this, you have an Audi S3, beautiful car, performance, 300 horsepower, dual clutch transmission, beautiful machine. And what does it compete with? The beautiful 2 Series BMW, also another great subcompact car in the sport luxury segment. Beautiful cars, and there's every single manufacturer has its own level of competition. This one's xDrive, just like the Audi's Quattro system. They're all very stylish, perform well, and are up to the task of anything you can ask for. But this is very competition that is actually a double-edged sword. It gives us lots of different great cars of different brands, lots of options for buying, but it's that very competition that creates challenges within manufacturing side of it. For example, supply chain is one of the big challenges. Of course, now they have to get more competitive with buying the parts, where they source it from. They might have to spec out a slightly lower grade of part just to stay competitive. So they put in modules, chips, electronics that might not normally be as high grade as they should be. They do that to save an extra buck on every car they pump out. That's a whole lot of money at the end of the day. Another place they get cheap, and this is where the competition comes into place, is again saving costs. So they use a lot more plastic. For example, in BMWs, there's lots of plastic. There's lots of known failures in modern BMWs. It all started back in the E90 series where they started integrating a lot of plastic in cooling parts. So you would almost always expect to get water pump failures, radiator failures, thermostat, cooling hoses, everything starts to leak because of the heat in the engine. And now with modern cars being mostly turbocharged, that heat is even more exaggerated and you have accelerated wear and tear. So it's that competition that drives the use of plastics and poorer grade materials, causing reliability issues down the road after 5 or 6 years. Now, it's also that very competition that drives these manufacturers to offer other packages. For example, free maintenance for the next 2, 3, 4 years, free oil changes, free servicing. Yeah, that's all well and good. It looks great on paper until you actually take it to practice. And when BMW says now all of a sudden it's a 20,000 kilometer oil service, what does that mean? You're extending your oil intervals. The oil isn't that much better that you can avoid oil changes. In fact, the old rule of thumb of 8 to 10,000 miles for synthetic is probably more applicable, but they start stretching their service intervals just for the sake of what it looks like on paper and to be more competitive, to get people in the door. That will work against you for reliability down the road if you're not changing your oil or doing your standard service when you should. So the second reason now why modern luxury cars are no longer reliable is because the focus has shifted. They've gone from durability, reliability, sturdy transportation, and they've all moved it along to a profit-driven business model. And that unfortunately works against you as the customer. Works great for them, but what they start cutting costs on, obviously the assembly line, manufacturing, so those things start taking a hit right from the get-go. BMW, Mercedes, Audis have some of the higher levels of failures initially out of the warranty box. But because there's a push to produce more cars, there's a strong emphasis just to keep pumping them out. The other part is where the service sometimes takes a hit. Now sure, they try to pamper you, or at least that's the emphasis, but often I found in practice that's not happening. Instead of maybe giving you a loaner car, for example, like brands, Jaguar still does that, but BMWs, a lot of these local manufacturers say, no, we'll shuttle you around in a little clapped out Toyota Previa minivan. So they're saving costs there. You also don't feel special anymore. Often you got to book way in advance to get any servicing done. And generally speaking, service isn't quite what it used to be. You sometimes don't feel like they even care. And honestly, it's not until you're standing there at the till waiting to pay that bill for $2,000 that they seem to perk up. So sorry, but that's just my personal experience. So the third reason why these cars are no longer as reliable as they once were, or even really should be, is the cost of labor rates, of course, have drastically gone. Like everything, cost of living goes up, everything goes up because of inflation. Well, people at the local dealerships, the mechanics, the service people, the sales people, everybody needs a little extra kick in the pants just to get by nowadays, just to afford living. So what does the end user see? They see increased shop labor rates. $180, close to $200 per hour in Canadian fees just to get your BMW looked at. Can you imagine? How about that ridiculous $250 diagnostic fee? At least here in Canada is what they gouge you with, no matter what is going on there. Sure, they'll say they include it if they actually repair the car, but what if it's something that's not so expensive? They're going to slap that $250 fee on there. It's not like I'm going to drive away and try to fix it myself after they diagnose it. That's not the intent, but you still feel like you're getting greased with the $250 fee. So a lot of people are starting to skip on maintenance, skip on repairs, try a little do-it-yourself. And when the wrong person gets their hands on the car, sometimes other stuff starts to break. Obviously, things don't get treated maybe as they should have from the factory, but people do it because they're getting thrifty, especially as cars get older, 4, 5, 6 years of age, and they're out of warranty. People do what they have to do to keep their car running. May not be always the best choice. Let's also not forget about some of the parts costs. Well, they keep going up. Now with increased complexity like computer electronics, all of those things start to get very, very expensive. And as a result, anything that you have to fix ends up costing you an arm and 3.5 legs just to get it out the shop. So unfortunately, with a lot of BMWs, Mercedes, Audis, costs are almost prohibitive for your standard owner, as a 5 or 6 year old car winds up in the hands of the third owner who can no longer really truly afford to maintain the car properly, and naturally the car starts to nosedive in terms of dependability. It takes a hit. So if you treat it right, it likely will survive the test of time, but sadly enough, many people can't afford to keep running these cars. The cars depreciate so hard, they hit rock bottom, so they get to the point where, why would I put a $3,000 or $4,000 service into a car that's only worth $6,000 or $7,000? It doesn't make sense. So people start getting nickel and dime, and that just drives it even further into the hole. So the fourth reason is the lease and finance availability and the aggressive and very competitive rates now that lenders are providing buyers. It becomes an easy thing to do just to tie in with a 2 or 3 or 5 year lease, get into a car, get out. No longer is the day of buying a brand new BMW or a brand new Mercedes feel that special, because everybody and their dog is starting to buy these cars. Finance rates are affordable, lease rates are giving you an opportunity to get into one of these great cars. They're still an awesome driving machine, but the reality is there's so many cars flooding the market. When they come back from lease, the used car market drives them into the hands of the second, third, fourth owners who, again, as I spoke previously, start to neglect the cars because maybe they don't have the funds to truly own and operate a modern day luxury car. So sadly, those secondhand cars off of leases take a hit in terms of dependability, and firsthand, people are just quick to flip the next one. And so their 2 or 3 year old BMW or Mercedes just becomes secondhand news. Now it's really this whole new culture of throwaway. Cell phones, computers, TVs, and now cars are all basically part of the throwaway culture. People don't care for them. They think that it starts to wear a little bit. Throw it out, buy a new one. Hey, there's some really affordable lease rates available. Let's just get a new one. So that's what ends up happening. Sadly, it's the enthusiast that often buys the car secondhand, but sometimes the enthusiasts don't have all the funds that the first buyer actually does on. So the fifth reason why modern luxury cars just aren't as reliable as they used to be, in fact, is because every single brand now is upping the ante in terms of technology and performance. Here's a classic example, is the 750. Right here we have a BMW 750 right there. That means this one here has the twin turbo V8 chalked under the hood there. So everybody knows by now that these engines have the hot V. So in other words, they've got 4.4 liter twin turbo V8 engine. Between that V, you have 2 turbos. Those 2 turbos get hot, they start cooking the heads. That in turn then starts to melt down the gaskets. You start getting leaks, you start melting down the heads. The valve guide seals and the valve guides start to deteriorate. You wind up with heavy oil consumption. These also have a timing chain issue. Everything's pushed to the thermal limits because turbocharging. Yes, these make a huge amount of power, but unfortunately, now at the expense of durability and reliability. Talk to Lexus. Lexus will tell you all about it. They don't have as much power and performance, but they keep it simple and reliable. And we also look at cars like this with all of the electronics. I mean, this is the flagship car for BMW. This will have every piece of electronic that the brand will offer. I mean, you've got sunroof, which is the basics, all-wheel drive system in the xDrive. You have all your navigation and electronics, safety controls in place. These things are decked out. There's nothing that this car can't do for you. It even massages your backside while you're cruising along. So these cars have a lot of moving parts. I mean, even look in electric folding mirrors like this. This isn't just like a push in by hand. Everything's electric automated. So behind everything that's automated, there's a relay or a module. And unfortunately, sometimes that stuff starts to fail. And again, this takes us back to supply chain. Where are they getting some of this electrics from to support these parts? If they're cheaping out somewhere along the way, maybe they engage electrical component manufacturer and say, hey, save up on that chip. save on that part. You know what? We need to save a few dollars. They talk supply chain gets them the lower grade part, and you'll see earlier failures with some of these cars. And of course, the 750 has everything you can possibly imagine in terms of electrics. So it's the modern technology, which is very complex, but borderline unreliable for most manufacturers, just for the sake of saving costs and being competitive with some of the other brands like the Audis and the Benzes of the world. And with all of that said, I'm sure you guys probably want to understand which are the most unreliable cars that won't make it more than 100,000 miles. Be sure to check out that video, very popular. It's going to share the whole story with you. Hope to see you guys real soon. Catch you then. Bye-bye.